good morning, good morning. Happy Tuesday. Hi, Dark Shutterstock. Good morning, good morning. How are you doing, Betty? Hi, Sarah. Good morning. How are you doing today? I'm good. I'm doing well. A little tired, but I'm doing well today, Sarah. Thank you for asking. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. But yes, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's story time. We're gonna get right into it today. We're gonna be reading the stories off. So, last week we got a little too chatty, and I just really wanted to chat with chat last week. So, this week we're gonna finish the story time, and yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to finish the story time this week. Let's see, today rather. Sorry, I'm a little kerfuffled. I woke up feeling kind of bleh. So, the weather's terrible, it's cold. And, yeah, so we're gonna continue reading Black Pearls of Faerie Strand. We're gonna finish off the stories for today. There's gonna be 3 stories this time around. So I'm gonna read them, and yeah, let's enjoy. The first story is called Evelyn's Song. So, get yourself nice and comfy cozy, and, let's get into it. Alright, let's go. Evelyn's Song. Now that witches are rarer than fish wings, most people don't know the first thing about magic. And the first thing about magic is that it hurts. When my aunt sent for the crone who lived at the edge of town, she meant only to scare me. So far as we villagers could tell, that foolish hag has never done any more harm than give our night watchman a potion that made him mad for the weaver's widow. The object of his affections weighed at least twice as much as the poor man himself, yet their match was no stranger than many made without benefit of incantations or filches. The marriage my aunt intended for me, I assure you, was far more ill-advised and much more laughable. Yet she would have me wed Lord Brevington, a man 40 years my elder, and she would have me curtsy sweetly before him, speak my little Latin, and play the harp. I, of course, would have none of it, and that is when the witch was sent for. "You have humiliated me for the last time, my girl," Aunt Hazel scolded. "Nor will I permit you to demean an honest proposal of our dear guest." She nodded at this, towards Lord Brevington, who seemed less demeaned and sleepy. He sat over the remains of Aunt's tea and scones, his head sinking lower and lower on his hollow chest. But I sat with the harp beside me unplucked, reluctant to play the song she had me sing for his lordship. It was The Turtle Dove's Lament, a ballad that found favor first at the court and then with all the unwed ladies in our town. The tale of a young woman abandoned by her love. It told her of standing above the sea on a towering cliff. She searched for her lost sweetheart's ship, clasped her pale hands across her breast, and leapt into the waves. The chorus, repeated 3 times, begins with the words, "Your wild love has won me, now claim your prize." I could not, you see, sing that refrain to the grizzled gentleman in our settle. I dare not, for I fear I would burst into laughter as I played. Indeed, one look at the poor old soul, his withered legs crossed under orange garters, had nearly undone me. "May I not play your lordship a springier tune?" I asked. Derry down, say?" My ardent suitor, who seemed to be snoozing, made no reply, so I begged my aunt instead. "Oh, please, auntie dearest, let me choose a song less passionate, more in keeping with the, age and state of our visitor." I could not keep from smiling as I pointed at the napping noble, and my aunt was in a rage straight away. She scolded me so loudly I was certain Lord Brevington would wake, but I need not have worried. It turned out that the good man had gone to a deeper sleep than the 2 of us guessed, for when we tried to rouse him, we found that he was dead. "Now see what you've done!" As if it were I who caused the old man's soul to leave his body. Aunt Hazel grew angrier still. "All our prospects, all our high hopes, dashed by a willful girl's stubbornness." She paced our small parlor like a trapped animal, sighing and calling on my dead mother to witness her daughter's perfidy. At last, she summoned Lord Brevington's footman from the kitchen, and then she called the witch. I was not afraid of Dame Meredith. I had grown up used to the sight of her pet form hobbling through the crowd at market, the sound of her nanny goat's bell when it wandered, as it often did, into our yard. So, after our noble visitor had been dispatched to his castle, and Dame Meredith had arranged her musty skirts across the same settle from which Lord Brevington had taken his leave of the world only moments before, I felt no alarm. Even when Aunt Hazel demanded an enchantment of the highest order, one that I was sure I would learn my place, I never dreamed homespun magic could prove any more potent than the scolding I had just endured. It required only a pinch of time, a trifling minute, to change my life. As soon as the dame had raised her arms and began her chant, I felt the stiffness invade my limbs. "Ye shall not rule to roost, ye shall not call the tune," she recited the words, the old woman spreading her knobbly fingers like a cap across my head. "But shall serve your master with nary a boon." It happened so quickly that even as I smiled at such nonsense, my legs went numb and I closed my eyes against a sharp pain that filled my chest. "With a lively will, though it be not your own, ye shall do my bidding and make no moan." No sooner had the pain stopped than my aunt screamed and I opened my eyes. I found that indeed my chest had been ripped open and that a shining bone erupted from between my breasts. I suppose it is a testament to the crone's witchery that I now felt no discomfort. I was dismayed only that my dress was ruined, and my flesh turned the color of the coins my aunt had finished from Lord Brethington's doublet as he laid beyond the cares of earth. Stranger, or should I say more horrible still, I saw that from the gold mote which pierced my chest, in a formation I knew only too well from hours and hours of practice, hung 20 harp strings. And where were these strings fastened? Why, all along my body, which, as I have said, has turned into burnished gold. I wanted to scream just as my aunt had when I saw, at the place which each string pierced my shining flesh, tiny droplets of blood lined the buttons up. Tiny blood drops lined like buttons up and down my chest and belly and thighs. But I could no more scream than speak or make the slightest movement to free myself from the spell that held me fast. "What have you done, you foul fiend?" Aunt Hazel was crying now, beating the old woman about her venerable head. "Bring her back this instant! Bring her back!" When her tormentor stopped to wipe her eyes, the hag rushed to the front door, but Aunt yanked her by the apron strings and forced her to stand before me. Dame Meredith, squirming like a pagan in my aunt's grasp, seemed as surprised as anyone at her handiwork. "'Tis only a minding spell," she protested, staring at my strings and my golden limbs. "'Twill make dogs obey and keep horses from leaping the fence." "My niece is no dog, beldam!" Despite my peril, I was moved by my aunt's tears and would have comforted her if I could. "You have pierced her through and turned her still as stone." "I meant no harm, mistress." Meredith reached out to touch me, then pulled her hand back as if she had felt fire. "No harm at all, I swear." "Undo your spell, witch," Aunt Hazel commanded, "and be quick." "I cannot." The fear in the dame's eyes made it all too clear she spoke the truth. "I do not know how." She explained to Aunt that no one had ever asked her to reverse the spell. Everyone preferred dogs that minded and horses that stayed where they were put. But Aunt Hazel would not rest until the witch had tried to unspell me. And tried. And tried. Finally, exhausted and hopeless, the old woman threw her apron over her head and wept as if her heart would break. "'Tis no use, my lady," she sobbed. "The child will not wake. She lives only to obey." Obey? My aunt, nearly as tired as the witch, gathered the strength to shake our neighbor by the shoulders. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Whatever you last wanted her to do, madam," Meredith told her, "is what she will do forever." "I wanted her to play." Aunt Hazel looked at me now, her voice as small as a child's. "I wanted her to play a song." "Then you only have to ask it," the witch told her, drying her eyes and making for the door. "Perhaps it is not so bad, after all." She sniffled as she lifted the hatch, ducking her head at me. "You need not feed her, from the looks of it, and 'tis certain the wayward child has learned to obey." Aunt Hazel, I suppose, had neither the strength nor the will to chase after the old woman, for she sat where she was, long after the hag had left, staring vacantly at the fire and only sometimes at me. "It was just one song," she said at last. "Not so much to ask." She shook her head and tears collected in the ridges under her eyes. "Not so much to give." That's when she stood and faced me, holding up one hand as the horse's trainer do at Tinley Fair. "Play," she ordered, and lowered her hand again. I tried to run from the feeling that arose in me as she uttered her command, I found, however, that I was frozen in a crouch, my folded legs held fast by the longer strings of the fiendish harp. So there was no escaping the rush of song that filled my chest and wanted to force itself from my throat. I had seen wrens and doves trembling in the throes of their songs, their tiny bodies convulsed in effort to set them free. And now here I was, equally enthralled to a melody I must release or die. My mouth opened and the song poured out. My golden arms rose, without my willing it, to pluck the strings attached to my own breast. The pain and the joy I felt as the music echoed in my chest made me remember the smile on our crucified Savior in the church of Warwicksford. I marveled at the exquisite torture I was inflicting on myself, and would not have it stopped for all the world. As I plucked and sang the very tune she had been unable to make me play a few hours before, my aunt stared at me in horror. Her mouth opened, her eyes wide. She listened, as still as a statue, to the turtle dove's lament. When the last notes had ceased shaking my poor bones, she woke from it as if from a trance. "It is a beautiful tune," she said, staring into my unblinking eyes. "But I would rather die than hear it again." Poor aunt sank to her knees before me, begging of forgiveness my frozen lips could never speak. "This is not what I intended," she cried, reddening her dress and pulling her hair out in great fistfuls. "This is not what I meant at all." It was only a week before my aunt succumbed to the shock my transformation had caused her already tender constitution. Unable to help, I watched in horror as she grew ever weaker and finally, whimpering like a starving animal, let death put an end to her suffering. Nor could I call out to those who buried her and sold all her possessions to the scrap dealer, except for the harp, the great golden harp in the shape of a kneeling girl. None of the greedy folk who bought me, each paid a handsome sum, and then recouped it by selling me for even more to someone else, could make me play in the way my aunt had done. It was only a monster, a murderer and thief, who was able to at last put my magic to work. I suppose he was accustomed to giving orders, to treating others like dogs, for he had once stolen me from my owner and climbed the mountain to his palace. He did not sit beside me and try to pluck my strings as the other had. Instead, he pointed his terrible finger at me and thundered, "Play!" It was the first concert I sang for the giant, but hardly the last. Just as all the tales say, he loved to listen to his magic harp. In fact, it became a ritual for him, each evening after supper. No sooner had the dishes, with their mess of gnawed bones and rejected bits of gristle, had been cleared from the table, than the huge fellow would count the money he had made off with that day, called for his magic pullet to lay golden eggs, and at last demanded of his wife, "Where is my golden harp?" I often wondered if the little russet hen were under an enchantment too. Perhaps she was a young girl like me, or even a good dame who had offended some magician or spellweaver. Perhaps it cost her the same pain to give her, and gave her the same throbbing joy to lay her eggs as I experienced when I sang my songs. Often, when the giant lifted the bird from its nest and commanded "lay," I felt the same loosening in my throat, the same heat in my veins that accompanied my songs as they rushed, like an air from the bellows, out of my chest. The giant never went to church, and I doubt that he was acquainted with the Bible or with our sweet Lord. But I think he knew something of beauty and of holy sorrow, for when I sang for him, his dreadful face became composed, his eyes closed, and he was acquired the devout, worshipful expression of the parishioners back home. He never needed to tell me which song to play, for as a result of my enchantment, I knew without words what melody he wanted to hear. The giant loved most the plaints of waifs and wanderers, perhaps because he was an outcast himself, feared and scorned by the folks he terrorized, as he wept each time I sang of loneliness. "Aye, aye," he would say, nodding his frightful head. "That is the way of the world, is it not? The sorry way of our sorry world." Then, a tear as big as a pillow on his mighty cheek, he would close his eyes and soon be snoring. You may be surprised when I tell you my life with the giant was not a bad one. It is true I could not move or speak, except to sing, and that at someone else's bidding. Yet though my songs were not my own, the way they sounded first in my chest and then in my master's heart made them almost like hymns. It was as if I had been born to bring this savage creature peace, to soothe that massive furrowed brow, and to put all to sleep in that perilous place, where our castle clung to the rocky cliffs above a patchwork of little towns. In between songs, I suffered not at all, feeling neither hunger nor thirst. Sometimes I watched the giant's wife mend her husband's endless leggings, or listened to the pair chat over their supper. But most days I slept away the time, only waking to sing and then slipped back into dreams of dancing and talking and running as I had before my enchantment. Some wise men say our time on earth is but a dream. If so, my life has changed little. I woke up from sleep to serenade my master, to settle his heart in his house, then slipped back into the past, where I could still speak my mind, and my own 2 feet still took me where I wished to go. I cannot say exactly when the boy first came to us, when he sneaked in to change the regular rhythm of our days. I know only that even after we discovered he had stolen some of the giant's gold, no one was much disturbed. The giant's wife blamed herself. The young man had looked so lean and meatless, she explained. No good for one of her husband's hearty stews. No good for much except fattening up. So she had fed him and hidden him, hoping to surprise the old man with a treat one day. But the boy had betrayed her kindness and run off before he could be cooked. Run off with a bag of yellow coins. "Do not trouble yourself, wife," the giant told her. "The little gnat took nothing of value, nothing I cannot get back twofold from his village below." And it was true. So long as the hen was untouched and I played for him each night, the giant was content and life went on as it had before the stealthy boy's visit. The great man would stumble home each afternoon with more jewels, more gold, more trinkets. His wife and he would place them in bags in a storeroom, where they remained untouched. There was, after all, nothing for them to spend the coins on. The giant had long ago frightened away all the merchants and tradesmen in his domain. On rare evenings he would ask for a bag and run his fingers through the shining coins, but the pleasure he got from that was nothing besides the way his spirit lifted when the hen ruffled and squawked and lay, like a miracle, a perfect golden egg. But when the boy stole the hen, everything changed. The giant's wife must have guessed how angry her mate would be, for at first she lied. She told him that the hen had wandered away and must have fallen off the cliff beyond the castle walls. But her husband, whose large nose was more sensitive than 10 smaller ones put together, knew the boy had returned. "I smell him," he bellowed. "I smell that pesky troublemaker. Where be he, wife?" He began to stomp around the rooms downstairs, the stones jumping from their places with every footfall. He tore the tapestries from the wall, peered under the tables and benches, opened the chests and drawers. "Be he live or dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." It was then that his wife, fearing for her home, pointed a shaky finger at me. "Play," she commanded. And though she had never craved a song from me before, it was clear she needed one now. I felt it pour from my throat just as my fingers rose to find its notes. There will never come her like again," the ballad began. "She was doting and clever and true to the end." It was a song of mourning for a dead lover, but the giant knew it was meant for his stout little hen. He stopped, sat in his great chair, and clasped his head in his hands. He wept as I never heard him, openly, like a great tree-sized child. When the boy came back for me, I must have been dreaming of dancing a jig or chasing the cat from the pantry. It was only after he hoisted me onto his shoulders and was carrying me out of the door that I found my voice. In all the years since I'd been bespelled, I had never been able to speak, but feeling him struggle under my weight, sliding to one side of his back and nearly tumbling from his clumsy grip, was shock enough to spill the words from my throat. "Help, master!" I crooned, half moaned. "Someone is stealing me away!" You have heard what happened next. All the stories tell how the sad tragedy played itself out, how the giant woke from the slumber into which my tune had lulled him, how he thundered, "Stop, thief!" and then gave chase, how the boy tightened his grip on me and ran as fast and as far as his short legs would take him, how my master followed after, old as he was, taking one lumbering stride for every 10 of the thieves, and how, as my master tired, the boy was able to gain a few precious pieces and lower himself down a vine that clung to the crags where the giant's castle had perched. How we reached the ground and chopped the stem of the plant in two, sending the giant, his huge hands reaching for a hold in the sunlit air, crashing to his death at the bottom of the cliffs. When my master fell to the earth, the whole world trembled. The boy who held me was knocked off his feet as the ground shook, and since he grasped me fast, two of us tumbled and rolled together until we came to a stop at last, pinned under one of the giant's boots. The bells in the towns were ringing nones by the time the young man's family and some villagers were able to bring the timber and pry the boot toe high enough to set us free. The boy and his mother had themselves a fine manor, though nowhere as big as my former master's castle. It laid at the end of a long road that snaked its way through the green farmlands and the humble cottages of their servants, field workers, and stable boys. Thanks to the money they had stolen from the giant, there was always a pleasant fire burning in the hearth of the great house, nor was there any end to sweetmeats and pies and other delicacies. Since the magic hen continued to lay precious eggs at the lad's command, settled in a place of honor by the hearth, she was fed as much corn as she liked and frequently pecked at the boy's mother if the woman raised her voice to him. Clearly, the bird felt her lot had improved, and she seemed not to miss the hilltop castle we two had left behind. As for me, I was glad enough to see my old friend, though her bright, unblinking eye betrayed no memory of the years we had spent under the same roof. I began to doubt she had been enchanted at all. I slept much of the day, just as I had in the giant's home, but when I awoke there was no one to play for. My new owner was so busy showing off his costly clothes in church and at markets, so eager to attend dances to court every young maid in town, he seldom fancied music at home. Even if he had, he learned early that he may not have his way with me as easily as he did with the hen. The first time he brought me to the house and set me proudly before his mother, he had pointed his finger just as he had seen my master do. "Play," he'd command me, but I could not find no tune in him. "Play," he repeated, anxious to show what a fine treasure he had stolen. While the giant and his wife had nursed slow, shy songs in their hearts, this boy seemed to need no music at all. My head stayed bent over the strings, my golden arms rigid at my sides. "Perhaps there is another trick to it, my lad," the boy's mother guessed. "Mayhap you missed some magic word that makes it sing?" "No!" The boy pushed me from him so roughly that my strings shuddered and I felt a cruel tug in my chest. "I watched that great ogre careful as careful," he insisted. "Play is all he said, and point as he did." Once more he aimed his finger at me as if it were a musket. "Play!" he roared. "Still, 'tis a lovely thing, my sweet," his mother said, studying me as I sat, silent, where her son had placed me. "Tune or no tune, 'tis made of gold, I'll warrant. Mind how it shines and all." I sensed a timid ditty, the beginning of a song, as she looked at me. But as she dared not command me, I fell back to sleep. So they stood me next to the hen, and then they were pleased to have visitors praise their new harp, the very size and shape of a lovely girl. "The filthy monster placed a spell on this instrument," the young man would tell them whenever they asked if I might be played. He would pluck one of my strings and then they'd fall back soundless. "It may never be played by the pure of heart." That was enough, of course, to keep strangers from trying to coax songs from me, and the boy always boasted mostly of the hen, whose eggs he could be sure of calling forth. "Now look ye here, for a true wonder," he would say, lifting a glistening egg from under the uncomplaining pullet. Though it was a lie and the giant had cast no spell to keep me his, it was the same as if he had. The lad and his mother no longer tried to play me, and, having no songs of my own, I remained silent. I certainly missed the times where my master's loneliness had pulled tunes from my throat. Alas, no one but me mourned his death at all, until the villagers at last succeeded in heaping dirt over his great fallen body and constructed thereby a massive fortification outside the town's gate. My poor giant lay looking with unblinking eyes at the endless procession of curiosity seekers who traveled to see the slain monster, and of course, to heap praise on Jack the Giant Killer, as they soon christened the boy. Jack loved to meet a crowd of such travelers by the mountainous corpse and tell over and over how he had bested his fearsome enemy. "Fee, fi, fo, fum," he would howl, loud and gruff as the voice of death in a Whitsunday pageant. "Those be the very words of this hell-fiend scream when he came after me." He would brandish an imaginary sword, swirling in mad arcs around the giant's arm or leg. But I was not afeard, you know. It only required a bit of daring-do to smash this clumsy oaf into kingdom come. By the end of his tale, which grew and changed with every telling, young Jack had always made himself out to be the bravest, most courageous man in all the world, one who richly deserved the coins and treasures he had pilfered from my master. and each time he recounted his glorious adventures, he was wont to bring his folks home to gawk and make much of his hand and his golden harp. Yes, lest ye believe me or not, he would tell them, here is all the magic proof. When the body of my old master was at last moulding under a vast hillock of earth and thatch, it was clear that the cocky young man who had killed him now had more time than he knew what to fill with it. There were no more travelers to listen to his tale of glory, and the prettiest of the village girls, the one on whom he had set his heart, grew tired of listening to his suitor talk about himself. As he wooed her by the hearth, the hen and I were privy to most of their conversations, and through her final announcement that she had decided to wed the mayor's son. Suddenly then, Jack remembered me. I shall take this magic harp to reimagined, he announced to his mother, only 2 days after his ringleted sweetheart had abandoned him. Perhaps it was damaged when the giant fell. If I can make it play again, we will have some gay parties to mend my heart soon enough. But what of the giant's curse? His mother asked. I thought only the black of heart could play her strings. Her expression as she studied me was half sorrow, half yearning. That was just a tale I told, Mother, Jack said. I wanted to keep her safe from prying hands. Aye, the woman said, excuse me, still watching me doubtfully. But when she glanced again at her son, she was once more his doting mother. Why, lad, 'tis a fine idea, she told him. And then you might take up the flute your father left. He played it like an angel. He did. Jack was already dragging me from my place at the fireside. Perhaps, Mother, he told her, wrapping me in a dark cloth, shutting out the light. But think of the seasons wasted while I must learn to put my fingers just so on the stops. This harp will play by itself. Or there's the viol, his mother offered. Your uncle says 'tis the favorite instrument at court. Mayhap, good dame. The young man's voice sounded agreeable, but he tightened his grip on the bundle he made of me. Yet that one will take even longer to master. Besides, they have nothing like my golden harp at court. So saying, he juggled me to his back and trundled me down the street before his mother might think of another instrument for him to play. We wandered around corner after corner, and though I could see nothing through my swallowing, the cries of vendors and the smell of fish and pies and the stench of chamber pots poured into the gutter brought memories of my girlhood in my aunt's village rushing back. At one turning when my owner stopped, I thought we had reached the studio of the musician who would fix my strings. But I was wrong, for Jack began to yell and curse at somebody nearby. Have you no better bed than the street, old peasant? Out of my way, I say. Clearly the young man's anger had gotten the best of him, for I could feel that he was kicking whoever blocked our path. He kicked so fiercely and with such hatred, I fell from his back and lay on my side, the cloth that had covered me undone and my eyes staring into a deep puddle where the rain had collected between cobblestones in the street. I had far to search to find the object of my owner's scorn. An old man dressed in beggar's rags with a face as red as fire lay curled like a baby against the vicious kicks. When Jack stopped to catch his breath, the old man lowered his arms and glanced toward me. His yellow eyes narrowed, and when he had assured himself that he saw, that I was not an airy dream brought on by mead, a smile cut his face like a knife. He stared at me now and held my gaze even after my owner had resumed his savage attack. Move on, you worthless carrion, Jack screamed. He stooped to retrieve the cloth in which he had wrapped me and began to beat the man about the head with it. Are you deaf, you old turd? Get up and let your betters by. It was then, while the young man yelled out, and the old one stirred, that I felt, as strongly as I ever had in a giant's castle, a song well up in me. Though he did not point and he did not speak, I heard the beggar's command as clearly as if he had been my dead master, leaning against a brocade pillow and bellowing play. And so I did, right there, in front of my astonished owner. I reached out to pluck my strings. Once again, at long last, the painful ecstasy took me, and the words rained like waterfall uphill, charging from my throat. I once had a love that was truer than true. The old man's knees dropped from his chest, and both he and Jack were still as the stones as I played. 'Twas long ago when the world was new. I could see the woman in the beggar's eyes, a dark maiden with a hungry, heart-shaped mouth. Kiss me once and kiss me twice and beg me thrice to stay. The man's eyes closed now as he lay quiet as a sleeping babe. And keep me in your prayers tonight, though I be far away. As the song ended, Jack turned to me triumphant. You can play after all, and here I was about to spend the pretty penny to put the music back in you, sly wench. He gave the nipple on one of my golden breasts a tweak, and then stepped carelessly over the man, who lay still unmoving in the street. Wilt they hear your songs now? They shall be begging to dance to my tunes, all the beauties in the town. He bounded me up in the cloth again and headed back to the way he had come. And won't she be sorry, Miss Proud Heart, who would have none of me? Well, Miss High and Mighty pined to be invited too. But of course it did not happen that way, for when we got back and Jack called his mother to come see, when he removed my coverings and commanded me to play. Ow. One moment, please. When we got back and Jack called his mother to come see me, when he removed my covering and commanded me to play, he still not a single song in his heart, and I remained silent. I fear the musician does not know his work, my boy. Jack's mother had settled herself on a chair for my concert, but seemed a little perturbed by its postponement. You must take the harp back straight away and make him do it right. But I tell you, this harp played, Jack was yelling now, and though his mother had done nothing to deserve his harsh tones. Just by the miller's courtyard, right by the street, a song for all to hear. Jack would not rest until I played again, and 2 or 3 times he pointed at me and shrieked, "Play, you harlot, play!" 2 times, 3 times, I felt no song to play, and my head remained bent and unmoving above my strings. Even after his mother had urged him to come to supper, to forget about music until the morning, he ranted and raved and ground his rude thumb in my eyes. "You shall play," he promised at last, kicking me so that I landed on my side and clattered against the hearthstone. "Look what you've done to the poor thing," his mother said. She stooped to set me right, took a handkerchief from my sleeve, and knelt down beside me. Making small clicking sounds like the hen when she settled to roost, she spat upon the cloth and used it to polish my head and shoulders. It is a sad thing, indeed, to put a name to something precious you have lost. So it was for me when the woman stroked and petted me. I felt, of course, neither the warmth of her hand nor the weight of her fingers against my golden skin. Yet the memory of touch, of embraces and holding hands, of strolling arm in arm, or jostling up against the market crowd, all this came back to me so that I was loath for her to stop. But stop she did at last, rising and standing back, arms folded to check her work. She looked at me with the same self-satisfied smile my aunt had often bestowed on a gleaming goblet or platter, then followed her son to the table. "Hi, gamer lover. Hi, Cal. Is this Romano and Juliet?" "No, it is Evelyn's song. It is a story told from the perspective of the harp in Jack and the Beanstalk." So, this was not the last time Jack's mother picked me up and rubbed me into a shine. My surly owner saw fit soon enough to hurl me again to the floor in a fit of temper. One night when Jack and a companion came home from hunting, we sat by the hearth to eat a late supper and drink toasts to their own prowess with a bow and arrow. After many boastful toasts and too much mead, Jack forgot that there was anything he could not do. And so he pointed his finger at me and commanded me to play. "Hi, Sniper. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing well." Jack forgot that there was anything he could not do, and so he pointed his finger at me and commanded me to play. I tried, you must believe, to find a song in that bleary-eyed lad. As I listened, 2 shadows, one tall and the other short, fell across his heart. The tall figure sank to the smaller one, but though I knew it would not serve me to hear the words, I could not make them out. But though I knew it would serve me to hear the words, I could not make them out. Like a fairy tune from a faraway wood, his song was lost in dim. I remained as quiet, then, as any other harp without a master to play it, and I dreaded what my silence might cost. Instead of getting angry, though, Jack laughed and bade his friend to try his hand, too, at making me play. But the other hunter, who had just toasted his own skill into felling a pregnant doe, had no more music in him than Jack, so the 2 of them proposed at last to make their own songs. They laughed and roared tuneless ditties at each other until I dared to hope they would fall into a drunken slumber and leave me in peace. It was not to be. From the uproar woke Jack's mother. She came to the great room in her shift, her hair undone and begging them to be quiet. Perhaps because she had just been torn from a dream and a piece of it was still in her head. I felt how much she yearned for the earlier, simpler times she and her son had shared. Her despair at her laggard boy, and her own regrets brought my arms to my strings. If I had a cow, a large brown cow, a jug of milk I'd bring thee. Even in their cups, the two friends were stunned by my newfound voice. Jack's companion looked as if he thought black magic was afoot, and Jack himself rose from his seat, startled from his stupor. If I had seeds in a patch of earth, I'd grow a sweet pear tree. I felt a small warm pride as a dappled day half dawned from the woman's heart, and all the lords for a mile around would beg me for a try. One small bite of that sweet pear, one glance from your fair eye. But I had no chance to sing the rest of her song, for Jack came towards me, anger blushing his cheeks, so that even in the light of a single candle, his face looked like a Turk's. You sing for a beggar, do you? He snarled. He hauled me from the hearth and lurched toward the door. And now you think to sing all by yourself, do you? He opened wide the door, howling into the night air. Go sing to the moon about cows and seeds. We'll have none of your country airs. With that, he shoved me outside, slamming the door so that I heard no more of his blustering, and lay cradled in the grass until his mother tiptoed out to rescue and polish me, then set me again by the hearth. Once in the night, I thought I heard a trace of a song in someone's dreams. It might have been the pale shadow tune I felt earlier in Jack. It was not bold enough to rouse me, though, and I slipped back into dreams of my own. Perhaps my song had emboldened her, or mayhap she intended to dispose her son more kindly towards me. In any case, it was Jack's mother who finally carried me to the musician's house. She hired a fellow to hoist me onto a wagon, and then drove me to town herself. When she visited the baker and the milliner, the sooty little man, whom she entrusted me, worked for hours of her stringing and tuning, yanking and tightening till I thought my chest would burst. At last he was done, and she drove home to set me proudly before Jack. Now she shall hear this harp play proper at last, she promised, pleased with herself and the pleasure I was sure to bring the spoiled young man. Are ye certain that fellow's done the job? Jack asked. As certain, his mother assured, for I stopped on the way home and commanded it to play. Indeed she had. And when she'd pointed and ordered music, I had felt a whole flood of tunes dammed up in her heart. They were fair to drowning us both, and I had a hard time choosing which one she wanted most. And it played as lovely as you please, and sang, like an angel in the house of the Lord. Well then, Jack's greedy smile made his face almost handsome. We shall invite the neighbors, and have that musicale at last. He bade his mother draw up a guest list, making certain she included the maidens he admired most. I will go to the butcher myself, he offered, and fetch back some venison and lamb. Hi, Kakarot. Hello, good morning. The party was held 3 nights later, when it appeared that half the town had assembled to hear me play, or rather to hear Jack order me to play. Dressed like a peacock in apricot and turquoise silks, my owner moved from dame to damsel, offering his hand in honeyed words. He looked and acted very differently indeed from the fellow who spent most of his days lying about the house, gaming or drinking with his friends. Inside, though, he was no different at all, and as soon he was to prove it. When all were supped and seated, he bellowed nearly as loudly as a giant, "Where is my magical hen?" The servant laid a brocade pillow before him, then set the hen upon it. She was now as plump and proud as any fowl I have ever seen, and when Jack shut it lay, she raised her head and clucked serenely before stepping away from a glistening golden egg. As always, the onlookers gasped and begged to touch the marvelous orb. As it was passed from hand to hand, Jack kept his eye on his latest treasure. All the while, he smiled and stroked the careless preening hen. Too soon, however, he tired of this familiar triumph and called out to the giant always had. "Where is my golden harp?" he thundered, though all could see the servant had fetched me and was placing me upon my tasseled rug at his side. When all was still, Jack made a great show of rolling up his sleeves. He pointed a ring-bedecked finger at me and stared imperiously from under his brow. "Play," he commanded. You have surely guessed what happened next, for lad still had no song for me to play, no melody I could draw from his heart. After my silence came the usual curses and the tantrums. Jack tried and tried and tried, but could not make me sing. Finally, just as he's done before, I was carried to the door, and in front of all his gaudy guests, my master proclaimed that a harp which didn't play was not worth keeping. The door was thrown wide, and the entire company drew back from the night. It seemed to me that Jack struck a pose, holding me on his shoulder like Atlas, with the world. Time seemed to stop. Several ladies tittered nervously, and someone gasped. At last, though, he mustered all of his strength and hurled me with such venomous fury that the strings were torn from my chest as I lay, as if dying under the eaves of the coachman's shed. Spells are supposed to be broken with good deeds, or with the answer to a riddle, or with true love's first kiss. But that was not the way. The enchantment that bound me was at last undone. I doubt the bandy-legged giant killer who hurled me from his house cared where I landed. But had he only used a little less arm or a bit more gentleness, the magic might not have been throttled out of me. And had his good mother rushed to retrieve me instead of giggling nervously and calling for more savories, I might not have fallen into that healing sleep. When it was over, it was as if a dream had ended or a fever broken. I woke to the wickers and warmth beneath. I woke to the wickers and warm breath of a handsome bay, leaning from his stall to nibble at my hair. I felt a tingling in my arms and legs, a ringing in my ears and skull, and the heady, dimly remembered rush of blood through my veins. Without knowing what I did, I raised myself onto one elbow and opened my eyes to the sight of my own 2 legs, my long-lost knees and shins. There was pain, yes, but nothing I could not endure, would not have suffered doubly for the sake of what came next. I stood, sweet heaven, and then rose up and I walked. Surely nobody notices the poor girl who struggled to her feet by the stables, who stood for a moment eye to eye with the bay, then turned towards an open field behind the great house. There were no words, only a rhythm in my head that moved my feet, that called my name, that drew me to the forest where the moon was setting. When I passed the door which I had been tossed, was it moments or days before? I heard no voices and all was still, and dark. And yet as I left behind that sullen house, there came again the shadow songs I had felt in someone's dream. Was it days or years before? The 2 figures in the dream were clearer now, and I could hear Jack's father laughing. I see him hoist his small son to his shoulders. He sang a tune to the little boy, a tune I could have played, music I might have sung. For the time it takes a candle to smoke and then go out, I lingered and listened. The pull to soothe my master, to find at last the song that would bring him rest, held me. But then I heard again the pounding in my ears, the rush of my own blood. My song. Though I had been so long bewitched that I barely remember what it was like to have a will of my own, I heard a new tune now. No one had pointed at me. No one had shouted play. Yet clear as a stone dropped into the still pond, loud as the call of geese across the sky. I heard the music of my own heart. It played a stream burbling into the shade of an apple trees, in the warm solid thrum of waking bees. I had no words for my song, but the scent of fruited boughs and the rush of wind against my chest were as real to me as my own 2 feet. Those feet, no longer made of gold, climbed the pasture gate and set out the woods beyond. I raced forward, trampling damp grass until I came to the top of a rise. I stopped for a moment to look back at the great house below. Inside its sleeping windows were old songs, music that was dead to me, other people's dreams. I tossed my head back like a mare slipping in its bridle, and flew into the morning, running as though I would never stop. Good morning, Wasabi. Hello, hello. Good to hear that you are doing good. And hello, Kakarot. How are you doing? I'm doing alright. You guys. I'm a little tired, so I'm just gonna read through the stories today. We only have a few more, so we're gonna read through them. But yes, that was the end of Evelyn's song. And now we're gonna go on to the next one, called Diamanda. When I first saw her, the name caught like a prayer bead in my throat. Diamanda. I have never called her that out loud, of course. Well, she was in hiding with us. She is a simple maidservant's name, and now the troubadours have christened her Snow White. But those gossips were not there when we found her. Arms and wrists smeared with blood, lips the color of crushed violets. We're finishing the book today. We only have a few more stories, so we're going to continue reading them. But those gossips were not there when we found her. Arms and wrists smeared with blood, lips the color of crushed violets. She was not white as snow then, but I've spent my whole life prying gems from the mountain's belly. I don't need to see their faces cut and polished to know how they will shine. Her tap on our door might have been the wind, or a branch in its fall, so soft was the sound she made. When at length I opened the door that night, she fell across the threshold, one arm landing so that her fingers nearly reached the fire in the hearth. Clotted with mud and covered with blood, she might have been old or young, man or maid. But then I found a cloth, stooped to wipe the dirt from her eyes, and saw what she was. As I freed her face from the filth that hid it, my brother's sighs were like the moans of souls raised suddenly from damnation to paradise. For the 7 of us, grown to manhood without the scent or touch of a woman, she seemed a goddess, some glory streaming sprite, who's taken a wrong turn and stumbled into the real world, where goddesses could cut themselves on thorns, wander lost for days, take sick and shake with chills. How I wanted to rush outside and tear the dead roses up by their roots. How I yearned to bathe her in the pond at Faerie, to hold her until the water caught her fever and she lay sleeping in my arms. Instead, I made a pallet beside the hearth as we stretched her along as if best we could. She lay, her head against our bundled cloaks, and stared at the ring of twisted faces, tiny bodies above her. Sometimes I wake at night, as if an old wound is itching, to see again the horror that widened her eyes. It was only seconds before her breathing asserted itself, and the look of revulsion faded. I am afraid I have lost my way. She wrapped the vestiges of a skirt around her poor bruised legs. I must ask your pardon and your charity. We all drew closer, our forgiveness palpable. She glanced at Corwin and then at me. I am Aaron, I told her. I stood posturing grandly while Dinell, more sensible in his adoration, grabbed the cloth from me, dipping it in a bucket of water kept by the fire. These are my brothers, and though we have dwarf bodies, our minds are as sharp, as hearts as stout as any man's. Dinell pressed the cloth to her head, and I added a deep flourish. But as I bent to her, I was consumed with a sudden shameful jealousy, and wanted nothing more than to wrest the cloth back from my brother's hand. I stood there, twisting my belt like a simpleton, lusting to feel her hand against my hair, to wipe sweat from the glistening hollow above her lips. My lady, I managed at last, we are at your service for as long as you wish. You are kind, she said, and I am blessed to have found such gentle hosts in this accursed woods. Her cheeks flushed, and her dark fond eyes rested on me. Had she known then how many years she would stay with us, how long she would shine in the midst of our deformity, she might have chosen to brave the snow and forest again instead. Her fever lasted 3 days. On the last morning, I was fixing a loose axe handle for Farron, so let him take her the broth. I had risen before dawn to spend 2 hours nursing potatoes and a few old carrots into what I hoped would pass for soup. When Rowan had fallen ill that autumn, I could not remember where he had stored the tormentel. But now, like a falcon with God's eye, I found the last of the herb under the hearthstone and boiled it all with the stock. So it was Farron she thanked for the thin soup, and, though he insisted he did not deserve it, I believe to this day she credits him with her recovery. When we came back from the mine that night, Diamonda's fever had broken, and she met us at the door. She had seen a broken flower beside our hearth. If she had seen a broken flower beside our hearth, she towered above us now, no longer a touchable goddess, but a bright and inaccessible as truth. Bless you all, she said, her hair freshly combed and braided down her back. She turned to Farron with a smile that twisted the innards of every man in the room and struck poor Farron dumb. As she talked, he could no longer look the sun in its face and instead stared trance-like at his boots. The soup you brought to me this morning had worked wonders, little physician, for as you can see I am quite recovered. She lifted the hem of her skirt as if it were a ball gown and spun around the room. Her dance and the slice of thigh revealed left us dizzy. No one could think of a response more clever than to moan and sigh as if we ourselves had fallen sick. I wanted to fix you a feast to repay your kindness, but I'm afraid all I could find was potatoes and cornmeal. She chattered happily as she led us to the table. She had only covered it with a cloth, but somehow it looked different, more precise, more to be reckoned with than it had ever been seen before. There were 8 places set, and she escorted each of us to a seat, as if we were noblemen attending a banquet. Here is your place, good Dr. Farron, and this chair is for you, Rowan. Now, Sir Dinell, if you would be so kind, and Corin, and Gifford, and here, Lord Timaeus, and you here, fair Erin. Dinell was the first to come to his senses. How, he asked, do you remember all of our names? His forehead, broad and corded with veins, wrinkled like a beggar's belly. His eyes misted with adoration. She laughed. How do you think I could ever forget them? Night and day while I was sick, I said them over like a catechism. I sank to the chair she had pulled back for me. Fair Erin, she had called me. I was torn between hope and humiliation. Was she singling me out for a joke? I looked at my brothers, their swollen heads bobbling and gleaming in the lamplight. Was I, last born of 7 freaks, the most freakish? Of the distorted carnival masks turned like dark flowers toward her brightness, was mine the most hideous of all? Warily, I studied my Diamanda as she filled each plate with the pebbly pancakes she had coaxed from our potatoes and meal. Her eyes shone with pride and good intentions. There was no hint of the disgust that had flashed across them when we met. And her lips? They were parted in a smile, full as a child's and impossible not to return. They exonerated her completely. She had spoken without malice, but did that mean, I wondered late into the night when we others slept, that I was actually not hard for her to look at? I had seen the children at the Ginful Fair whisper and draw back, tiny rosebuds closing all along my way. I myself had stirred my reflection in a stream, frothing the water until the shards of face under my hand could have been anyone's, even a normal man's. I knew better than to hope that she found me handsome or fine feature. Still, along with that sort of timid dream that springs to life only near sleep, I thought perhaps Diamanda might have found me a well-turned dwarf. It was weeks before she trusted us with her secret. Weeks that seemed now the gentlest of preludes, idle days free from whispers and bolted doors. It was then that I took Diamanda ice fishing in the pond that lies past the Faerie Caves. While the wind of envy rattled and moaned, closing its fingers around her hiding place, the 2 of us spent whole mornings in the blue shadow of the mountains beyond our forest, careening down ice-covered bluffs on a makeshift sled. We traveled towards the dearest friendship I have ever known. I remember how she would kiss me for luck, her lips burning my cheek before our descents. How she would throw back the cape from her face and laugh when one of our acropolis landed us, spray-legged ragdolls, into the snow. How afterward, she would sip my chamomile tea, weaving our dampened benches into stories for my brothers. And how she would stay up with me long into the night, talking about such foolish, inconsequential things that I will never love anyone so much. Not that she wasn't fond of us all. Not that she didn't take the pains to memorize each of our likes and dislikes, our moods, just as she had our names. But, and I know my dwarfish dreams do not deceive me here, there was a special look, a way of smiling, a tone of voice she saved for me. The others noticed it too. Sometimes they teased, but more often they acknowledged the distinction, the primacy that Diamanda's silent preference bestowed. What should I shoot for dinner? Rowan would ask me, the huge quiver slung over his shoulder. Does she like squirrel? Or after we had eaten and she was turning the spindle by the fire, Corin would steal to my side. How can I tell her without hurting her pride? He'd whisper, his hands hidden in the dangling, over-optimistic sleeves of a jacket she had made for him. You know how to put things to her. It became a nightly ritual, the others climbing into the loft for bed, while Diamanda and I stayed by the hearth to talk. And so, if she had something hard to tell, it was only natural that I was the one she chose to share with it first. But but I would rather any of my brothers had taken my place that night, had sat beside her sipping tea, and heard her speak of leaving. "I didn't tell you before," she said, watching the orange village at the bottom of the fire tumble into ruin, "because I could not bear to worry you." The light from the fire caught a shine at the edges of her eyes. "For surely you see now that I endanger you all by staying. We must say goodbye, my dear friend." I was the first, then, to hear how the Queen had driven away her lovely stepchild, long before witnesses whispered it to children at bedtime and courtiers banished it. With a wave of their ringed fingers, to the exile of stale gossip, the fairest woman I have ever seen told me her story. It did not surprise me at all to learn that Diamonda was of royal blood. For me, she shone as brightly in our thatched cottage as she does in the palace that is now her home. What did astound me, though, was the idea that anyone anywhere would wish her harm. "How can your mother put a price on your head?" I asked. "How could flesh turn against flesh?" "She is not my mother, Aaron. My father used to tell me he dreamed my mother." The firelight found her frown, kissed it with honey. "When I was little, it made father sad to speak of her. Each time I asked what she looked like, he would only lay on my arm and make me take him to the huge mirror in my stepmother's bedchamber. He would stand me in front of it and stare over my head to the glass. 'There,' he would say, 'that is what your mother looks like.' I cannot remember my own mother, but I know she was not a dwarf. I know because of the wine pitcher that Timmy has bought at Ginfall. As Diamonda spoke, I glanced up to where it rested above the hearth. A comely woman holding grapevines on the handle might have been our mother's twin. All my brothers said so. When I was a child, something stubborn, some unschooled weed of pride, sprouted in me each time they told the story of my birth. Too weak to lift her head or to open her eyes, my mother had smiled at them as she held me tight. "This one," she'd say, "is fine as a prince. He's a dear, normal little lad, isn't he, boys? I told your father it would be different this time. I wish he could have seen what a strapping son I had born." "Ah, yes," my brothers told their dying mother. "Here's a healthy, normal babe for you at last." They had crowded around me, patting my ugly head, kissing my withered limbs. "Just look at his handsome face," crowed Warren. "And his body," admired Griffith. "How firm and straight he is. He'll be as tall as an oak," promised Timaeus, tears blinding his eyes. "As strong as any man for miles," wept the Nell. Only Faerie and Corwin, too young to play the game, began to protest that the baby's head was much too large for its body, that its eyes bulged out horribly from their sockets. So they were banished from the room and did not see our mother sigh, draw me to her, and whisper in my ears, "The best for last, sweet Aaron. As if the best for last." The Nell says I never cried until they took me from her arms. The fire was a grey powder, but I could not let Diamonda go. "There is no reason to run away," I insisted. "This poor place is probably the last spot on earth your stepmother's soldiers will look for you. Why, you could stay safe here forever while that greedy monster tears up the country for miles around." "I wish it were true, but the smith's wife told me today there's a brigade of royal troops coming near Hyman's Cross." Diamonda poured a glass of her tea over the ashes, then bent her head over the empty cup. "I wondered why the money isn't enough, Aaron. She has all of father's fortune. Why does she need my death?" "Perhaps," I said, stiffening with pleasure as she took the hand I offered. "Your stepmother is afraid you will change your mind about renouncing your inheritance. She has only to look at you to know there is no man alive who would not fight to the death to support you." The more she smiled, the more I wanted to prove my words, to show her I meant what I said. "To the death, I swear it!" I yelled, struggling to my feet, punch determined to fell giants. "Many thanks, sweet Aaron." She was whispering now, my battle cry had already had the others stirring in their sleep overhead. "But your death would hardly please me." She stood then too, and put her hand on my shoulder, which shook like a thing apart. "What you can do for my sake is sleep well tonight, and help me tell the others in the morning." Sleeping was an art Sleeping well was an art I lost that night. When they learned how close the troops were, my brothers decided to spread the story in the village that our visitor had gone back to her home and family. This precaution, though it proved necessary, forced Diamanda to live like a prisoner in our dark cottage. And I lie awake each night, grieving her loss. Who is warmed by a transient sun? What sort of reprieve was it to live with the knowledge that she wouldn't have to leave us? As the day wore on, Diamanda was no happier than I. Each morning, as we left for the mines, our royal stowaway seemed more nervous, less patient. She seldom complained, but her eyes were distant and uncertain. Her song turned sad, and she paced when she walked. I feel as if I am on a draughts board with nowhere to go, she told me one morning. At least let us steal out after sunset, Aaron. We could skate by moonlight, and you could tell me all the stars' names like the way you used to. She made it sound as though we were yearning for something that had happened years ago instead of weeks. And she made it impossible for me to say no. We waited until well after dark, then set out with torches across the snow. When we reached the pond, she ran towards it with a little shriek of delight. She stooped to put on the skates I had carved her from a yew branch, and then, like a finch loosened from its cage, sped out onto the ice. Hurry up, Aaron! Her shadow darted and wove over the shining ground. Look, I've already learned to skate backwards! Though I would have been content to stand and watch her forever, I put on my skates and followed her onto the sheet of moonlight. I have been skating as long as I can remember, and though she learned quickly, I still had a few tricks to teach her. She liked my leaps the best. She held her breath before each jump and clapped like the villagers at a juggling show when I came down. I was skating to the farthest edge of the ice, having decided to leap across a log standing in the middle of the pond, when I saw the lights. They were a good distance away, I could tell, but how fast they were advancing was harder to judge. I raced back to where she stood and grabbed her hand. I pointed to the torches twinkling like stars on the slopes above the stream. If they are on horseback, we have no time to get home, I decided, already skating away from the cottage. We will hide in the mines. We took off our skates and stumbled through the snow, cutting west towards the far side of the hills which the lights were filing. It lies just ahead, I told her, battering my way through the drifts that reached my hips. She followed gamely, less encumbered by the snow that came only to her knees. But fear had taken her breath, and she sucked in the icy air too deeply as she ran. We had reached the entrance to the shaft and worked our way down to the point where the torches were hidden from view. I stopped and made her rest. I climbed back to the surface to drag a branch across our tracks and seal the entrance behind us. We are safe enough now, I told her when I returned, unless your stepmother's men can see through stone. She would not sit but remained pinned to the wall of the shaft, gulping air as if it were water, her body shaking, her eyes closed. When the pounding of hooves echoed in the caves, she ran to me and threw her arms around my neck. Her chest was heaving, and I could feel her heart jump against me. As the men above ground yelled to one another, I pulled my arms around her too and forced her to sit on the ground, soothing her as I would a child. Shh, do not fret. I will not let them harm you. I knew our mine as well as I did my own home. I was calm and certain of our hiding place. There is no need to worry, I whispered, my breath spreading smoky fingers in the gloom. Still, she shuddered and held me close, breeding in me a kind of madness, a sharp desire to prolong her anguish. For as long as the men remained dismounted and their footsteps crossed and recrossed the ground above our heads, Diamanda melted into me. As long as they continued to yell and laugh, her sweet breasts were mine to press against, to feel with arms that fell slyly, secretly against her time and time again. We remained undiscovered, and when the horses have clambered off over the hills, we were free to go home. But not free to risk again such foolish expeditions. Even Diamanda now saw the sense in her confinement and begged no more for our moonlight skates. Our caution doubled and our lives rattled like dried pods. My brothers and I became prisoners too, circling dully between the mines and the cottage, afraid to take trips to town, deal with traders, or let beggars in for food. In the center of our weary pattern, Diamanda grew more and more restless, her only entertainment the quiet talks she and I share after the rest had gone to bed. Do you suppose, she asked me, one evening halfway to spring. Then you and I want what is best for us. She was mending a tear on the vest I had bought from a puddler. I had noticed how often the slow, regular passage of her needle through cloth had turned her philosophical. Now something crumbled and gave way inside my chest as she pricked herself, sucked her finger inside. Do you suppose God has arranged it so that human desires are like seedlings bending toward the light? My body was a stream swollen with sudden thaw, racing towards things I could not see. What do you mean? I asked. Oh, I know it sounds wicked, she says, eyes once more lowered to her sewing. I used to have a tutor. He was a priest. He told me that the body desires, but the spirit is always satisfied. Do you think that is so, Erin? The sound of rushing water filled my ears. I looked at her, helpless with longing. It was a longing of the flesh, yes, but of the mind too, and of the spirit, surely, since I would gladly have accepted transformation into the mindless, sexless cloth that she worked just to be near her. What do you crave, dear friend? I asked her, trembling at the thought that it might be something I could give. She looked up from her mending, her whole face flushed in the way it had been when she was ill. You will laugh at me. I could never laugh at you, I protest, or deny you anything you ask for. Only tell me what you want. Before I explode with need, I should have added, with the frustration of heaven glimpsed through a keyhole, a distant horizon that calls and calls. Perhaps it is wrong to want more than what we already have, she said at last, no longer looking at me, staring instead at that smoking hearth. But my dream is so stubborn, so dear, I cannot give it up. I think I know what love is, Erin, though I have never tasted it. Still, she could not bring herself to look at me. The cause, to my mounting joy, was not my appearance or any aversion she had to it. The flush on her cheeks, her downcast eyes, suggested instead that her naive modesty struggled against a consuming passion. How strange, how sad that I am, most awake when I am asleep, when he whose touch I have never known opens me like a flower. One of my brothers turned in his sleep above us. The wind outside howled and beat itself against the door. The moon stopped rising and waited, caught in the window. Who? I asked. Who is he? Someone I know, she told me, staring still at the ashes. As well as I know myself. Someone who has helped me bear sickness and poverty. Someone whose face I carry like a dear familiar secret wherever I go. What had been a pale shoot of possibility was now a monstrous delight that out-howled the wind, filled me with a vanity and courage I had thought reserved for larger men. I never guessed, I said, standing and walking to her, that you were yearning for what is near at hand. I meant to her now, a good child rewarded suddenly with his fondest wish, a pious zealot about to collect the answer to his prayers. You are right, Diamondo told me. He's no further than my dreams. She too had gained courage and was finally looking me full in the face. His kindness, his devotion, are as close as my heart. His handsome smile, his tall and graceful form, they only wait for me to close my eyes. Poor deluded dwarf. Now the current that had boiled up in me closed over my head. A drowning man, I sank down beside her chair, my face in my hands. Handsome, I repeated. Tall. I knew you would laugh at me. She shook her head, stroking the velvet vest in her lap. In truth, Erin, I do not blame you. Here I am, a penniless princess, dreaming of a man I have never even met. Again she shook her head. Sometimes I think I will manage it, my friend. I think I could be content to stay here with you and your good brothers. And then I go to bed and he is with me again, wooing me away, calling me past any delight I have known. That night, though I mouthed platitudes and urged Diamanda not to abandon hope, I buried mine. I smashed the wine jar with the beautiful woman on its handle. I threw it with all my might against the hearth and watched it shatter against the stones. Perhaps Diamanda too lost heart. Perhaps she began to fear that she would live forever with her diminutive admirers and never meet her handsome dream. Perhaps that prospect was worse than returning to the trap she had sprung. Why else would she have let in that old beggar woman? Why believe in winter apples when all around her was ice and chill? Unless somewhere in the secret reaches of her dreaming heart, she had chosen to die. The others found her first. I had taken to waiting behind, watching to make sure no one had followed us home. When I walked in, my brothers were standing in a hushed ring around her. She lay as if, overcome by weariness, she had decided to take a nap on the floor. Her cheeks were still flushed, her skin warm. The apple had rolled from her hand and stopped, wine-colored and immense, just short of the ashes in the hearth. Though it looked fresh-picked, plump with sun, a horrible stench filled the room. Had she noticed the smell when her first bite broke the skin? Had she welcomed the poison, inhaled it like a perfume as she fell? The foul odor and the purplish skin of the fruit made me certain it had been tainted with belladonna. Of the 7 of us, I had learned the most about healing and herbs, but the Amonda was beyond my help. If she had been felled by henbane or hemlock, I would have set to boiling nettles in hope of reviving her. If her heart had been stopped with mistletoe, I would have asked Dinil to climb Corwin's broad shoulders and reach me the mandrake root that we had hung dry to dry from the rafters that fall. But I knew of no remedy for the poison that had now spread its silent tyranny to every part of her. I placed my thumb on her wrist and my ear to her breast. How many times in the years ahead I was to find my head against that precious pillow, to hear nothing but my own heart racing. My brothers closed around us, expectant, hushed. I have told them that she was never dead nor alive, but gripped by a poison that had stolen her faculties and sealed her body like a tomb. We put her to bed as we had when she first came to us, stretching her across the pallet by the hearth. It was not until she was covered with all the blankets we could find, until she slept like a frozen bird beside the grate, that I heard the strangest roar start up among us. When the rest drew back silently and left me standing alone beside her, I realized that it was me I heard, wailing like a wolf and beating my fist against the hob. It was Farron, always best with his hands, who built the crystal cocoon in which we placed her. What if there's a change, he asked. What if she wakes and needs us? Aaron says she isn't dead, and I will not bury her alive. So he felled a maple and he carved a bed for her. While he fashioned wooden angels and rosebuds, the rest of us contented ourselves with bringing home what gems we could and setting them in a necklace for her to wear. When the bed was done and we had laid her in it, Farron covered her with a casket all paned in glass so we could be sure to notice if she stirred. Fearful lest the queen discovered our sleeping treasure, we hid her bier in a small shed behind the cottage. There, each of us in turn stood guard beside her, waiting for miracles. But the Amonda never moved. As winter withdrew slowly like a beaten cat, and the green buds pushed, gripped by a poison that had stolen her fact. The fuck? How did that even happen? As winter withdrew slowly like a beaten cat, and the green buds pushed through the forest, she jumped on, unchanging. When the woods around her surrounded with restless mating calls, she lay as beautiful and perfect as a stone saint in church. When spring had spent its promise and summer too, we kept the fire going and wrapped our hands in wool while Diamonda felt no chill. At last, when the ice stretched once more the length of the Faerie Pond, only the 7 of us were a year older than we had lain her in our bier. I kept the juice of the apple on the stoppered vial. I mixed herbs, concoctions, tinctures, and to find an I mixed herbs, concocted tinctures to find an antidote for the poison it contained. As the years passed, scores of squirrels and rabbits met their deaths at my well-intentioned hands. First I would poison the little beast, and then work my latest cure. All to no avail. It gave me hope, though, this foolish doctoring. It convinced me that I worked for her recovery. For as long as I kept meddling with my potions and powders, I told myself I was surely as anxious as the others for Diamonda's deliverance. Though in truth, I had less reason to be, because so long as she laid still and lifeless, I could be with her in the way a real man was meant to be with a woman. Or very nearly. As nearly as a repulsive dwarf dared. If it has been torture to remember this, then it is damnation to tell. For whenever it was my time to stand guard at her bed, I lay beside her instead. How could I see her desirable beyond endurance, and not lift the cover to separate us. How could I stoop to kiss her cheek and not beg her forgiveness by burying my face in her breast? It was always the same. I began by swearing I would not come near her. I stood at one end of the hut while she lay, steaming radiance at the other. I told myself I could do as the others did, could serve my love without demeaning her. And so I clung to my side of the tiny room, wrestling demons that would have given a giant a stout match. When I turned, it was only because I thought perhaps she had awakened and might need me. All innocent concern. I would make my way to her side and lean over just to make certain she had not called faintly from beneath the glass. She had not called, of course, but lay as always a candied sweet. The jewels we had scavenged from our poor minds seemed cloudy against her lustrous throat. Day after day, the hope was fresh each time I looked inside the glass, each time I watched for the damp print of breath on its face. And so, telling myself I might have missed a cry, her muffled call, I swung open the casket and bent to feel her pulse. Once so close, I kindled an oil-fed blaze. Farron had made her bed long and broad enough for two. Tingling with shame and a rough, unstoppable need, I climbed in beside her. Too late then to curb the hunger that guided my fingers. Too late to reprimand the wicked, insatiable dwarf who had stroked and kissed and licked her hands, her face, her perfect breasts that weighed just beneath the corded neckline of her loosened gown. Is there a reward for taking the devil's hands but refusing to dance? Is there a place in hell, less loathsome than the rest, for those too small of a soul to finish the evil they began? If so, I am spared the ultimate punishment that would be mine if I had once been able to take Diamonda in her byre the way I did each night in my restless, guilt-stained sleep. Because I did not. Always, when I reached lower end, with 1,000 tears and apologies, began to lift her skirts, I sought not my own dreams but hers. As I touched her, shaking with fervor, I watched my hand become large and fine, the fingers lengthened and straightened in those of someone else. The palms grew lineless and white. As I tried to lower myself onto her, I felt my body change. My legs were charged with power, thick and long and coiled with strength. My arms lost their withered crook and looked as smooth and graceful as an acrobat's. And my face? I cannot tell you how I saw it, but I did. And I felt the transformation as clearly as you feel an icy spring rush against your skin. My bloated head grew slender and handsome, my eyes and nose perfect as Diamonda's. I was, for a moment, what I always yearned to be. Diamonda's dream. Locked inside this new and chiseled form, I watched my sweet love reach out to me. She stirred in her sleep and put her arms around me, but as she drew me to her, blind and doting, the horrible dwarf twisted free and ran from the hut to stand sobbing with his back against the wall until his watch had ended. Year after year, her dream vanquished me. Night after night, I laid in my bed, rubbing and rocking, while Diamonda, chaste still, waited for her prince. If I had been the one on watch when he came, I would have known him, disguised or not. As it was, he wore a deep hooded cloak and told Grifford that he was a healer from Waynport across the mountains. By the time my brother had raced to the house to fetch us, the stranger had the casket open and was holding her in his arms. He had thrown the cloak back from his face, and his light curly hair was like a flame above the dark tangle of hers. His features were as I had always seen them, bright, comely, and ripe with enchantment. She was already awake and looked, for one dazed moment, away from her redeemer towards the 7 mannequins clustered at her waist. As she turned, so did he, and twin suns beamed down on us. Her lips parted, but she did not speak, as if she had forgotten during her long sleep how to form words. Then, after roving over all of us, her eyes seemed to fix on me. A nameless shadow darkened her smile, and the shame of my old longing swept me. How long have I been sleeping? Now her eyes have found his again, though we could have answered her better. They say for years, my lady, he told her, his gaze locked on her face as if it were the North Star. Though, to tell the truth, I think I have slept all my life until now. She laughed. It was not the same delicate, embarrassed laugh I remembered, but long and sparkling and laced with delight. It seemed like no time, she told him. I dreamed of you and did not want to wake. Now she lives with him. Sleeps beside him and wakes when he does, her legs tangled with his, her hair caught under the pillow they share. When he holds tribunal, he keeps her next to him and will not render judgments until she and he agree. Sometimes, when she questions his decision, they argue and draw apart, strange hooded looks clouding them. But it is nothing. A storm in a summer garden, the confusion of leaves before they fall and lie together, limp and spent. Diamonda dreamed him before they met, brought him with her out of her dark sleep, and cannot live except in his light. So when she visits us, he comes too. When she sits with me, as she did today, sipping tea in her old place by the fire, he sits too, folded improbably into a small chair near hers. At times he watches her face when she speaks. At others he turns towards me, his shoulder brushing hers, easy and familiar with her touch. At last he stands, smoothing his doublet and taking her hand. She begs for a few more minutes, pouting prettily as she pulls towards the door. So they are gone, and my brothers have dragged themselves to bed, loggy with the cakes and sweetmeats she brought. They chatter in the loft a while, like nesting birds, then settle into sleep. I tiptoe, though all the bells in Haywick could not wake that well-fed crew, to the hearth. I listen to stone that hides the bottle, then hold the wine-colored poison to the firelight. It shimmers like an amethyst in my hand. The fire mutters into itself, and somewhere outside a dove whistles drowsily to its mate. In all the years Diamonda slept, I never missed her as I do now. How I loathe myself for wishing she was still waiting for me beneath the glass. Should I drink to the stunted passion which prefers a caged bird to one that flies? I open the door and carry the bottle with me to the hut. The moon is a regretful rind as I turn the key, and stand beside her old bed. Under the glass on the silk sheet is a long black shadow where she used to lie. Shall I drink to the ghost of yearning that stirs in me even now? The casket's cover is heavier than I remember, or perhaps my trembling only makes it seem so. I put the bottle on the table, push the cover back on its hinges, and smooth her sheet with my hand. Her spot is icy cold. Her warmth is somewhere else tonight. Perhaps I should drink to my 6 brothers, who will weep dwarf tears when they find me here. I take off my boots and, with an old eagerness, let myself down. Instead of lying to one side, though, I take her place, my head where hers used to be, my feet straining towards the angels at the bottom of the bed. Through the open door I see the slice of moon and hear a mouse or fox shuffle dry leaf across its path. My hand just reaches the bottle. I raise it to my lips and down it all, and close the casket cover. Here's to the dreams that will sear my sleep when Diamonda mourns for me and presses tight against the glass. Oof, that was a heavy one. But now we're gonna go on to the last story of the book. This one is called Naked. I need a sip of water, excuse me. Oof, that's cold. There you go. Naked. Ride a cock horse to Coventry Cross to see a fine lady upon a white horse. Rings on her fingers and bells on her toes. She shall have music wherever she goes. They are wrong, you know. I wore no jewels when Fidelity and I rolled through Coventry. The children in town still sing this song, but they are far too young to remember how it truly happened, and I am far too old to tell you a lie, close as I am to the grave. The horse was gray, not white, and the lady wore neither rings, nor cape, nor gown. Coventry was only a small village then, and most of its families were known to me and to my lord, Leofric of Mercia. It is due to the discretion and tender feelings of those good folks, and to the love of a single child, that the nursery rhyme fails to mention the strange circumstances of my ride. The time has come, though, to strip away such lies and to let truth, as the old psalmists say, to be my shield. Leofric was wont to tell me, in those days, that I took the woes of commoners much to heart. You are my precious Godiva, inclined to weep overmuch for the peasants and dumb animals, none of whom will shed a single tear for you. It is not with hope of return, I told him, that I aid those less fortunate than ourselves. I remember the eyes of the little ones when I threw coins into the street on feast days. It is for the sheer joy it brings me. And, I should have added, for the absolution. It was, after all, Not pleasure, but forgiveness I sought the day I saddled Felicity with the stable boy's blanket instead of the silver harness to which she was accustomed. It was to erase a sin that I mounted her and rode into town without the silk and jewels by which the people knew me. It was as a penitent that I dismounted, freighted with a secret treasure, at the small cottage where Ebba was being born. When it was new, Coventry boasted only a single street, a long path that wound in a circle around the town, and then worked its way to the River Coon on the other side, on one side into the Forest of Arden on the other. The house I sought that morning was halfway around the circle, and so I was forced to pass some 40 thatched huts before I reached it. Few of those poor homes had windows, but they all had doors. Soon villagers were running from one house to another, and more doors began to open along my way. Some village folk came to the street to stare, others watched from their doors, and still others turned away as if it hurt to look on me. All of them were silent, hushed by the fire in my eyes, and the shock of my bare legs against the horse's sides, my naked shoulder and breasts. I was too numb with righteous anger and hurt pride to notice their expressions, the care if one was lusty or another ashamed. But I remember still the old man who stepped into my path to grab hold of Felicity's bridle. He was palsied and trembling, but he held the horse fast until he had made the sign of the cross in front of my face. Then, God's work's done. He fell back to let me pass. By the time I arrived at Oedra's house, news of my right had already reached her. She rushed to wrap me in a rough woolen cloak before I had set both feet on the ground. "Here, my lady," she said, far more embarrassed than I. "You must not show yourself like this." She put her arms around me and helped me to the house, as if my nakedness had somehow made me infirm. I had ridden there in the heat of passion, filled with indignation. I had not cared who stared or gawked at the horse and I made our way along. Now, with the rude cloak thrown over me, I was suddenly ashamed. I never set foot inside any of the village's homes, and this one was humbler than I could ever have guessed. The floor was tamped earth, and a chicken roused itself from one corner to meet us and picked boldly at my bare toes. The room was filled with sweat and heat. Behind a blanket hung from the rafters, I heard a woman scream. She moaned and then screamed again, and I knew it must be young Frida, in the pangs of birth. I had seen her in town, a strong-limbed laughing girl who sold her grandmother's honey at market. Now, if the talk that had spread from town to castle, from gardener to cook, and finally to my own lady-in-waiting was true, this girl was giving birth to the Earl of Mercia's babe. And yet another scream pierced us. Adria bade me sit by the fire while she tended to her granddaughter. "Ah!" the girl wailed. "And there now," soothed Adria. "It will not be long." As I listened, memories filled my head and heart, memories I did not want in either place. Busying myself, I spat out the cloth bag I had hidden in my mouth. It looked like nothing. A tiny package wrapped in muslin, but when I untied the string and the square fabric fell open in my palm, the 10 gems in its center sparkled like stars. "It hurts, old mother! It hurts!" With Frida's cries, and the time of my own first birth came rushing back. As I watched the shadows on the other side of the blanket, the old woman stooping to where the young one lay, I saw again the face of the midwife who had caught my daughter from the birthing chair. She held my babe in both hands, her forehead gleaming with sweat as her voice crackled with weariness. "There was no crying," she had said. "'Tis not a good sign." "No, please!" Frida yelled from across the room. "Oh no!" Though I felt little love for the girl, I could not help but smile. How young she was, how little she knew of real pain. "See?" Adria's voice was patient, firm. "See how it stops for a bit?" Her shadow on the blanket raised itself to a standing position, and she sat at an old woman's side. "Here now, take some water, girl. Rest while you are able." But the screams still went on. "Oh, by Mary's bones, I cannot take any more, I cannot!" While the girl carried on this way, I bethought me to remove the other bag from gems I had hidden. I reached under the cloak with which the old woman had covered me and felt inside my own body. That is how, as Frida gave birth with groans and plaints, I delivered a much smaller bundle in the wink of an eye with only 2 fingers. "Ah!" The wail came again and then abruptly ceased. There she is, by Lord's mercy. I could hear the old woman smile in the light new cast of her voice, and I could also hear what I just yearned for years before, the lusty, outraged squall of a newborn babe. You've a daughter, Frida, and a long-legged lass by the look of her. A daughter? My knees weakened and I sank to the settle by the hearth. Beyond this bench and the table beside it, there was no furniture in the room. I heard straw shift beside the blanket as Frida stirred and sat up. I closed my eyes against the shadow picture I knew must come next, the babe in her mother's arms. Here now, hold her, you hold her. She'll find no milk in these old teats, Audra laughed as the babe cried, and then clucked with approval as it quieted. Aye, she's a hungry one, is she not? The things I did not want to remember, the hurt that I laid to rest, came rushing back. I saw again my little Nyla, felt the milk pressing like a flood inside me as the midwife put her to suck. What joy when her tiny mouth at last closed around me. What despair when it opened again and all the milk spilled out. Frida, her trials over, was laughing, cooing at her child. Look, mother, she said. She has small feet like yours. They're all small to start, the old woman said, then softened. See how she looks at you, girl. 'Tis enough to make you fall in love up to your ears. More rustling in the straw, more settling sounds. And what name shall we call her, grandmother? The girl asked. Asia stood upright again, her hands on her waist. Why, your dear mother's name, I think. Ebba is a good sound, eh? Yes. Frida bent to the little one in her lap. You will name for the incoming tide, little one, she whispered. You will always come home. How different it had been with my lost babe. I had already chosen her name, but I could not hold her gaze, nor make her take my finger in her hand. Even when I propped her against my knee and lifted her head to my face, her cloudy eyes fell away from mine. When Asia had made the new mother comfortable and returned at last to me, I pressed the jewels I had brought with me into her hand. She looked at me as though I had come to her with Moses' tablet or placed a phoenix egg in her keeping. What be this, my lady? She asked. What be this? Though her eyes could plainly tell what she held, pearls, rubies, sapphires, and an emerald as big as a walnut. I closed her trembling fingers around the stones. This be, good dame, your great-granddaughter's dower. As the foolish woman continued staring at me at first, then at the fistful of twinkling gems, I pointed behind her to the blanket. You surely know, as does the whole of Coventry, that the child mistress Frida, nurses not 3 paces from where we stand, was fathered by my lord. You know, too, he may not own this babe. It will not befit this title or his state to visit to dandle her on his knee. Once again, the dame was more embarrassed than I. She tried to throw her words cloak-like over this new nakedness. You need not have come here, good madam, he said. You need not have lowered yourself this way. Indeed, I asked, and again gesturing to the pair behind the blanket. And has not my husband already lowered himself? Frida was barely 14 years old, and Leofric nearly 40. The girl knew nothing beyond Coventry's fields and farms. My husband was the confidant of kings and the leader of armies that had laid waste the whole villages and had left for dead mothers and babes. Men may have their way with poor lasses, madam, Asia told me now. 'Tis the same as it ever has been, but this shall be an end to it. These jewels will take care of the babe, far better than any father in this village could. We are to keep these, then. I was, of a sudden, angry at the woman's thick peasant's face, at the way she continued to question her good fortune, and yes, at the picture this place had brought back. My Nayla, her lips wine dark, her skin as white as the christening dress in which she was buried. Do what you will with the stones, I snapped. You may feed them to this chicken for all I care. I stumbled over the fowl's plump body and strode to the door. I will not come again. Leofric had been right after all. This house, this babe, were nothing to me. Still wrapped in the tattered garment of my poor house that lent me, I set off on Felicity once more. I confess I hardly watched where I rode or cared who looked on us. The passion that had sustained me during my ride to town succumbed now to an exhaustion that overwhelmed my body and spirit. My horse walked on without lifting the reins or digging my heels in her sides. As I yielded to an old sorrow, Felicity picked her way down the hill on which the village sat and headed towards the River Coon. I saw nothing around us, only Nyla's curled hands, her small body, the coffin fit for a doll. The tiny box had been covered over a single shovelful of dirt. In one stroke, my girl vanished, my daughter, my hope. I had already knew then what it was to lose everything at once. Perhaps this is why that very moment I had willingly left all I owned behind. When I told him what I planned, Leofric had refused to own the babe and bade me to bring no thing of his to Frida's house. I shall not be a part of this madness. My husband's color always rose when he was ill at ease. Now, despite his righteous words, his face and neck were all aflame. You shall not drag me and my good name to perdition for your woman's pride. Forgive me, my lord, I had told him. You mistaken me. My mission in Coventry is not to punish, but to atone. Mission, he had thundered. Atone! He followed me to my chambers, and there he set his mighty frame against the door to block my way. You sound like a very nun. Who are you to mount a mission on my behalf? To proclaim my guilt when I myself have not done so? You have not denied it, sire. Excuse me. Nor can you, might I have added. I knew full well where he went when I turned him from my bed, but Nyla's clouded eyes haunted me, and I dare not risk another babe. I have no need to account to gossips for my conduct. I searched the countenance I knew as well as my own. If not to gossips, Leofric, I asked, then why not to your wife? He did not answer, but, shamed, turned aside to let me pass. Take naught of mine, he ordered as I pulled fast my chamber door. Not content with this, he pounded on the door until it shook and set to bellow again. Take naught of mine, I tell you. If you go without my blessing or my purse. He had thought sure to thwart me in this way, but my temper got the best of me. I opened the door when I should have bolted it, and I made a promise when I should have kept silent. My liege, I told him, feeling my own blood rush to my face. I will obey you in this, as in all. You have my word that I will ride to Coventry with nothing that is yours. And because everything I have is yours, I will ride with nothing at all. Which is how it came to pass that when I set forth a few minutes later, I left behind every stitch of clothing, every bauble, and every cloak my husband had ever given me. And true to my word, I took with me nothing that he owned, only what was due to his child. The gems, after all, were not Leofric's. His troop had plundered them at the siege of Worcestershire, and he had planned to make a gift of them to the church in Evesham. They were intended for God's sweet children, and, I reasoned, his new babe could surely be counted among those. As I saddled Felicity then, I wore only what I had been born with, and just as I knew he would, my husband chased after me, swearing oaths. By Christ's nails, I heard his boots against the stable door, and he saw the dust whirled up, tiny armies scrambling into the beam of light that he had let in. Go then, he said, loud enough to startle the other horses in the stalls. Give alm where none are sought. He stepped out of Felicity's path as I backed her from the pen. None is sought and none is sought and none, I tell you, is deserved. But if he had been full of oaths and tempers when he stormed into the stable, he felt utterly silent when he saw me now. His face wore the look of someone who had walked into the path of a coiled snake. A danger with which he had not reckoned. Yet, this was a danger with milk-white shoulders and a breast only half hidden by the hair that fell around me. The countenance he raised to mine reflected alarm and lust in equal measure. I rode past him to the stable door, but he still would not, nor could not speak. I reined the horse just outside and waited there, but my lord was paralyzed as well as dumb. He did not move, only stared and stared. Because my mouth was stopped with jewels, I too must needs say nothing. A rare pair we were then, a husband and wife with no words for each other. Just before I turned my horse, it seemed to me Leofric thought to speak. He raised one hand, but in his eyes was something like a regret. But the moment passed. He lowered his hand as I pulled Felicity's head around and rode off. Now, as I left the village behind, the road gave way to a dusty trail. I too felt regret. Not for my rash rebellion that morning, or for the gift I had given old Adra. What waited on me like a stone, though, was the chance I had just renounced. What harm, I asked myself, as I rode away from that poor hut, could I have done to hold the babe, to search for a trace of her father in her tiny face? But I did not turn around. Hadn't I just told the old woman I would not visit again? On what pretext could I go back now? Yet as we neared the river, my arms ached for what they had not held, and my eyes wept for what they had not seen. Two names clinged together in my heart. Nayla, with each beat of the horse's hooves. Ebba, with each step away from Coventry. Felicity snickered of surprise put an end to my pitiable musings. When she pulled short and refused to move further, I looked up to find that the bridge by which we had come had washed away. The river, chuckling and babbling like a child under the fallen timbers, hardly seemed strong enough to have done such damage. Perhaps thieves or villains had contrived to knock down the bridge and follow those pursuing them. Had not Leofric himself used that very trick outside of Worcestershire? My horse, after her initial startle, did not seem much perturbed. She ambled to the shore and, as if she knew no harm could come from the sun-dappled stream, put her head down to drink. There was no other way across, and I decided too to trust the river. "What say you, madam?" I asked. "Do you fancy a swim in the Coombe?" Apparently she did, for when she finished her drink and had gotten down from her back, Felicity had pulled ahead impatiently. I hugged up my cloak, held her girdle fast, and the two of us started across. The water was cold, not icy. And to own the truth, it felt at first like John the Baptist or one of the old holies, walking up to my ankles, and then to my waist in the chilly stream. I pictured my violent emotions, my pride, even my intemperate weakness for corduroy and lace, being washed away. We had not gone 10 steps, though, before the water's chuckle grew to a roar. I watched branches and then a whole tree fled past us. I spied a heron flying above a weedy nest caught in the stream. The bird swooped low, calling and calling to the fledglings trapped inside. When the water reached my breast and my wet cloak threatened to pull me down, I tried to turn back the way we came, but the current battled me so fiercely I was forced to cling to my horse and let her carry me ahead. The spray and the noise of the flood were fearsome, and with each step my hands nearly slipped from Felicity's broad back. But it was not until we were halfway across that I saw the goat and fully woke to the peril I was in. The old nanny, who must have thought, just as we had, to cross the stream at its narrowest point, was sailing like an ungainly bark downstream. She wore a bell that rang as she struggled against the torrent. She swept past us, bleeding in chorus with the bell, and I thanked heaven for my horse's size. When the poor doomed creature's head disappeared under a swell, I closed my eyes in prayer. By the time I opened them, we had nearly gained the far bank. Then, just as we got close enough to smell the sweet woodruff in the woods beyond the shore and to touch the broken timbers of a bridge that floated past us, Felicity stumbled. Perhaps she stepped into a hole on the river's bottom, or maybe one of the wooden beams that surrounded us knocked her off balance. Suddenly, in less time than it takes to tell, I had lost my good horse, for as she fell I went tumbling too, and though I tried to grab hold of the reins and pull myself back to her side, I could not. Instead, I found myself caught up in the great rush of water that rose beneath me and swallowed me whole. I tasted brine and grit and watched the great shadow flit past me under a brook. They may have been fish or turtles, but spinning and choking, I fancied they were mothers and babes, carried past me by the same current that held me in its way. Spun around and around in fear of my life, I mourned only two things. As I was dashed to the bottom of the stream, my hands and feet raking clots of mud, I yearned to undo the moment when I had turned Felicity towards the town that morning. As I prepared to die, I pictured myself pulling her short instead and leaning down from her saddle. I saw myself bending to Leofric, who whispered in my ear what he wanted to tell me at the stables. "Do not go," he begged, tears from my eyes. "Do not leave me." My other regret, the last thing I thought as the river pummeled and tossed me, was how sorry I felt that I had not kissed the baby Ibba on her forehead, had not set a tiny seal of forgiveness there, a damp print of love. When we are most in need of His salvation, and are most repentant for our sins, the good Lord comes to our aid. For I felt my world grow black, and my will to live snuffed out like a candle. I was suddenly pushed once more to the surface of the water. There I grabbed one of the floating timbers, a plank that, thank Providence, was still attached to the bridge's foundation on shore. From this desperate perch I look out toward Felicity, now scrambled in the middle of the flood. I shouted her name above the water's din, but though she thrashed and paddled furiously without her 4 great legs to set on its bottom, she could not fight the river. Imagine then my anguish as I saw my beautiful mare swept up like the nanny before her, kicking and splashing downstream. In vain I called. In vain I reached for her tangled reins, which for a moment danced under the current in front of me. What I retrieved from the swirling foam was only a trailing vine, and caught in its tendrils the torn cloak in which I had ridden here. I cursed the water that had returned this cloak and not my faithful mare, but I dared not let go of the splintered shaft of the wood that bound me to land, and so was forced to watch my horse, whinnying in terror, carried away from me. I followed her course, and though when her thrashing body disappeared around the river's furthest bend, did I make my own good escape. Hand over hand, caring not for the cuts the wood gave me or for the tears that streamed down my face, I worked my way along the beams to shore. I dragged myself up the steep bank, and then sat with my head in my hands and wept. I grieved for my lost horse and for my long-dead daughter. I repented, too, the rashness in which I had flouted my husband's will. But I could not do nothing to bring back the dead. It was not too late, I realized, with a swelling, a hopeful heart, to undo the hurt that I had caused in living. I resolved, wet and shivering in the shade of the forest that bordered the flood, to beg forgiveness from Leofric, to tell him how the lost babe came between us each time he sought my lover. Perhaps, I thought, remembering his face in the stables, God would yet send us a healthy child. Hadn't he blessed Rebecca with twins after 20 years of barrenness? Hadn't Rachel given birth to Joseph and Sarah to Isaac? I was not, of course, an ancient worthy like Sarah or Rachel. I was immoderate and hot-tempered. But our Savior had died just for such as me. I rose up, my tears dried, and followed to the road. Excuse me. I suppose I looked like some giant butterfly, flapping the old cloak as I walked. The steady rhythm and the relief of the sun on my skin soon restored my spirits. Excuse me. As I drew closer to the castle, I continued to make babes, not in the usual manner, of course, but in my head. They gamboled sweetly there, already grown old enough to romp and play with their glad parents. In my visions, Leofric and I joined hands to race with our little ones through meadows like the very fields I passed. When my imaginary infants tired, or when Leofric threatened to break our chain with his giant strides, we all fell to the ground laughing. My cloak was dry by the time I spied the western tower. It came to the road from the stables. A lone figure on horseback approached me, and I stopped to see who it might be. As the rider drew near, I heard a long, keening wail, a howl that set my teeth on edge and sucked the warmth from my bones. I shivered in the dark of that sound only a moment, for what I saw as the rider drew near still is a memory that had lodged itself in my grateful heart, and which I hope to take to heaven when I die. It's my husband, my Leofric, who came towards me, riding a horse I never thought to see again. Felicity whinnied as she spied me and tossed her head. Her master, though, did not glance up but rode with his eyes closed, tears coursing down his face. Without a saddle, his long legs hung limp. He sported neither boots nor cape. The Earl of Mercia, moaning as he rode, wore no tunic or leggings, no cloak or vest. He was naked as the day he was born. Sweet Godiva, he cried aloud, though he addressed the air, not me. Forgive my sins. Forgive my grievous sins. Before we lost Nyla, I had lain beside my lord. I had even found the battle scars on his shoulders and waist, had run my fingers over their toughened edges, and yes, placed my lips there once to heal old wounds. But I had never met his body, or when Leofric threatened to break our chains with his I had never thought... Jesus Christ. My tablet is acting funky, hold on. But never had I met his body in the sunlight to see how small and vulnerable it was against the great sky. I ran to him and took his hands in mine. I forgive you, my dear, I told him, and ask only that you do the same for me. Leofric trembled at my touch. Through his tears, he studied me as if I were a queen, an angel, Mary herself. I thought you drowned, he said. He slipped on the horse and knelt before me, his arms around my knees. I thought I lost you. The sight of my husband at my feet, his pale shoulders and the small tender bone at the base of his neck overwhelmed me. All the fine speeches I had practiced on my way home flew out of my head. Do not go, he said. His voice was a whisper like the one I had heard on the river's bottom, like a dream twice dreamt. His words, too, were the same. Do not leave me. I shall not go. I placed my hand on his head and held him there as if he were a babe. I shall not go. Behind us, Felicity stamped, impatient to be off again, but we paid her no mind. When at last my fond husband stood, it was only to hold me again. He wrapped me in his arms and whispered more endearments. You told me everything you have is mine, he said. But when I thought you did, I found that I had nothing left. Nothing at all. But sire, I swore then that I would ride to church. His body had ceased trembling, his voice grew stronger. I would beg God's forgiveness if I could not have yours. You have it, my good lord. And I would ride as I have to force you to ride. He released me then and turned away, naked and alone. I did not speak. Instead, I brought his face to mine and pressed my lips on his. No need to chatter on about my visit to Adra, to tell how Felicity and I had come to dare the coon. Those stories could wait. For now we had said all that needed to be saying. There was only one thing to do. Leofric lifted me to my horse, and because he could not bear to let me go, climbed up behind me. Though she had never carried us both, Felicity set out eagerly and brought us home almost as quickly as we wished to be there. We left her in the keeping of a groom, and then sped, our old lovers made new, to our chambers. I like to think it was that very night when Ilfgar was conceived. I choose to believe that those enchanted hours in which I learned again my husband's mystery and he mine were a joy that bred more joy. 9 months later our son was born. Like his father, Ilfgar was strong and well-formed. As he grew, scenes like the ones I had imagined on my walk from the river we often played out. For he and Leofric loved to wrestle and frolic, to test each other's mettle in mock jousts or play at cock of the roost. They would sometimes include me in their capers, especially if they had needed a damsel to capture or a keeper of scores. But there was between them a special bond, a love that springs up among men. It is not so much a secret that shuts women out as a rough and tumble place we cannot go. Nor did I need more than to watch my two fine fellows at play. I had my own bond, my own sweet companion in the land of women. For you see, I did go back to the old woman's house, and to the babe who had been born there. With my husband's permission, I visited often, and though Frida soon married and gave the girl a father, I became a sort of kindly aunt to Ebba and her family. Like my son, Leofric's daughter grew daily more comely and blithe. Though she seldom saw the Earl or her half-brother, little Ebba knew no want. The jewels I had left in her great-grandmother's care were spent on a stone house to replace the thatch hovel and a cow whose milk sold far better than honey. Before the old woman died, their state had risen so far above that of the other villages that townsfolk took calling them Elfriend, Earl's kin. Auntie, Auntie! The little girl would run to meet me as soon as I stepped down from my horse. Each time she had a long list of childish triumphs and disasters to recite. My rabbit has the grip, she would say, and father would not let me fish. I picked 3 apples, but no one would show me how to bake a pie. Well, my dear, I'd say, smiling down at her upturned face. A witch once told me that apples are good for ailing rabbits. I would take her hand, as excited as she. Let us see if it is true. While I loved my son and thanked our Savior each day for his sturdy limbs and sunny spirit, Ebba needed me more. When her mother told her no, I laughed and whispered yes. When her father thrashed her for her pranks, I slipped her trinkets and toys. In short, the child intoxicated me, and I spoiled her until she was as proud and willful as a princess. I was not surprised then when, in her 8th summer, my niece complained that Frida had punished her for no good reason. Mother is making me rebuild our wall, she told me, not even waiting until I had come inside. She said I'm not to kick and throw rocks at villains. What villains? I asked, laughing, taking her hand in mine. The boys who sang a song about a lady on a horse. She frowned and stamped a dark curl out of place, so that it fell across one eye. Ride a cock horse to Coventry Cross, she said in a flat, tuneless voice, to see a fair lady upon a grey horse. Though I never heard the ditty before, I knew its subject all too well. As Ebba sang, I saw again the crowd in the streets, the stupefied stares, the consternation. No mantle or dress, nor gown to her name, only her hair to cover her shame. When she had finished, the girl pulled her hand from mine and pointed to a hole in the garden wall. I took the stones from there, she said, and I threw them at those rude boys until they ran away. I see. I let the girl lead me to the wall, where the missing stones left a gap the size of a small dog. At least 10 fat stones had been pried from their nests. And just why, I asked, did you see fit to answer their songs with kicks and volleys? Ebba's dark eyes narrowed and she folded her arms. They say the song was about you, Auntie. Of course, I called them rogues and liars. Oh, my dear, I told her, you must not let wagging tongues hurt you so. I shall not, Auntie. I made them change the song. However did you manage that? The girl smiled slyly. 2 of the scoundrels, Edmund was one, Wilfred the other, came back the next day to show me the bruises on their ankles. Her smile grew wider, and I doubted her mother's scolding had taken root at all. I pledged to deal them twice the blows if they did not tell the truth. I told them your horse is white, as any fool can see. She nodded at Felicity's foal, Fidelity, who was indeed white, and whom I had taken to riding to since her dam now saw fit to do nothing more taxing than crop grass by the stables. I told them, too, that you'd never go abroad without your gowns and rings. My aunt is a fine lady, I says. Mind you put that in your song, or you shall still have black eyes as well as purple shins. I could not help myself. I threw my arms around the sprite, rewarding both her sauciness and the injuries that she had done. I stooped to run my finger around the empty space in the wall. I shall speak to your good mother, I promised. It seems to me this lovely niche you've contrived is the very spot for the flower urn I meant to give her. Naturally, there's more to tell. Things that happened later, when both Leofric's children were grown. My husband's death, Elfgar's victory in battle, and Ebba's marriage to a wealthy merchant. Oh, hi, Icy, I didn't get to see you. I'm sorry, buddy. I have to go now because I'm very busy. Yes, thank you for stopping by for a little while. I'm sorry I didn't get to say hi to you soon. I got caught up in the story. But have a great rest of your day, friend. Naturally, there is more to tell. Things that happened later, when both Leofric's children were grown. My husband's death, Elfgar's victories in battle, and Ebba's marriage to a wealthy merchant. But I prefer to end my tale here, with a moment I will relive until my current affliction carries me away. While I suffer the leeches and foul-tasting medicines my physician brings me daily, while I wait for our Holy Father to call me to him, I still take delight in remembering that girl child, how she stamps her feet and kicks boys' shins, how she changed the song and built the world anew for the image of her love. That was the last story of Black Pearls of Faerie Strand, and it's a hell of a collection, y'all. It's a hell of a collection of stories, and yeah, I quite like them all. I hope that you liked them too. Which one of them was your favorite? I hope that I did all these stories justice, and I hope they were, you know, as entertaining to listen to as they were to read. But yeah, which one was your favorite? Let me know. Let me know in the chat or in the comment section if you're seeing this much later. But yeah, that was Black Pearls of Faerie Strand. We finally finished it. But thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I haven't chosen a book yet for next week, but I'll pick something out. I'll let you guys know. But yeah, remember, hug your friends, tell someone you love them, and be a force for good in the world, because goodness knows the world needs more goodness. I love you guys so very much, and I'll see you either tomorrow for Calvin Frosthill's stream. We're probably going to play either Ghost Trick or more Cult of the Lamb. Or I'll see you guys on Thursday for more Amori. Alright, you guys, take care. Have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, afternoon, whatever time it may be. And I'll see you guys next time. I love y'all and take care. I'll be seeing y'all. Bye!